Now, looks like that I would say the next 16 months is really going to be very telling. It's not going to be determining whether or not we exit a VUCA environment. It's going to be what's the nature of the VUCA environment. Because as crazy as the experience was of the pandemic, things on a global scale, global level of social interaction, meaning world scale, have never been this complex in my lifetime. So there've been other VUCA periods in history, not while I've been alive, and I've been here a little longer than you guys. You may have lived through some very VUCA periods that may have been more localized to the part of the world that you were in. Okay, so I won't say that you haven't experienced it, but I certainly have. What we're seeing at a world scale is high levels of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, VUCA. And you may say, well, look, I'm going to get a job in southwestern Ontario, in Windsor, and you actually just get a good chance of getting a job here if you choose to stay. Because this is one area in Canada, I'd say the best area in Canada to be in for the coming years. And HR is a huge in demand area for employment in this area. Our clients can't get enough HR people. So you're positioned really well if you choose to stay here when you graduate. But even at that, we have clients from, like I said, we work internationally, but probably 40% of our clients are local, and they are struggling with what's happening in China, okay? Because we work with a lot of companies that are in the mold making business, and in China, they're doing better at mold making than we are here, even though this is the place that it all kind of started. So they're competing, and they're actually setting up facilities in China. I never thought that, they would end up actually doing that. So we're a globalized society, whether we want to or not. And there's a lot of push to decouple from China. Don't be so contingent or reliant on China and things like that. It's already too infused. But we're not getting along well, right? We've got a lot of tensions internationally in that regard. So VUCA looks like it's going to be the way it is. Let's look at how the brain responds to that, and let's spend this course figuring out how we will be in what I would argue the invariable inevitability of a continuous VUCA environment for more than, I would say more than the foreseeable future, because we can't see very far into the future. So this is our roadmap for this entire course. And I use this in leadership development in corporations all the time. This is the single most reproduced slide in all the stuff that we deliver in leadership training, because once you understand it all, it becomes almost a diagnostic tool, right? So one of your employees is acting out in ways that you can't figure out what's going on. They're not like themselves, what's happening. And this is what a leader said. He went to this gray onion model, and he started to figure out how his employee was behaving relative to the dynamics on that, and he came up with a strong hypothesis and then shifted his leadership approach to this person on the basis of what he thought was going on with that person. Lo and behold, he was actually right, and it helped that person get out of a very limbic state and into a far more grounded state where he could function much better in the workplace. Okay, so once you understand all the components, and me going over this won't tell you exactly what all the components are. Most of our lectures are going to feed into your deepening knowledge of the components of it. Okay? So you know that the brain kind of looks like this, but this is the way we're going to be looking at it. And last time, I'm going to go through quickly the center part, and we'll bring in the rest of it. We know that we are limbic creatures first, right? The alarm and the reward centers of the brain are there. We're emotion-based creatures before we're anything else. And then we get into our core needs. So we have these needs need to be met, and we continually need to meet them at different phases of our life. And so A is autonomy, okay? R is relatedness, having connections with other human beings, and C is competence. Now we're going to see later in the second workbook how this is going to work into your own self-evaluation and how you're doing with meeting those core needs. Okay, in your own life. And it's possible, it's not just on you, because you could be in an environment where you're prevented from achieving one of those things. So for instance, right, somebody who is in solitary confinement in prison is going to have difficulty gaining their relational needs, right? If they can't have interactions with others. Or you may be in a culture where you're not allowed to study what you most want to study for whatever reason that might be. And so you can't become, at one time, women couldn't become physicians in Canada. Now that changed about 100 years ago, but you couldn't get into medical school no matter how talented you were if you were a woman. So that would mean competence needs were being denied you in a sense, right? Because you've got a great mind for biology and the human body and being a physician, but you weren't allowed to do it. So it's not just on you, it can be the cultural context as well. That can lead into shaping our identity and shaping our, which is coming up, right? Our neurotic loading, which we talked about last time as well. But before we get there, we got temperament. We're going to be doing this next week. We're going to be diving into your temperament. You're going to be understanding the 4 temperaments and what your temperament particularly is. And you're going to find out that there is no temperament, or therefore personality, because personality rests on top of temperament, that is the ideal personality or temperament to lead. None of you are going to find out you don't have what it takes, because all 4 temperaments can lead very, very effectively. It's not going to be determined by what are your personality and temperament profiles, okay? That sort of runs in a counter to what many people think about what constitutes effective leadership. By the end of today, you're going to understand why. Personality, we're going to get into the dark side of personality, because those are the individuals that are going to want to get more power for the wrong reasons, and then when they get it, they're going to exploit it. Okay? And I want you to be prepared to see and spot when those people are out there and trying to enter your organization, or are already in and are destroying it from a cultural standpoint. So personality, again, sitting on top of temperament. And last time we found that personality can be shaped by the external world, but usually if it's shaping it, the external world shaping your personality, it's usually in a negative direction, because all personalities, core personality types, are equally valid ways of being in the world. But sometimes you get messaging that says your way is not okay. Now I did get that for a while, because I was told, you got to be more outgoing. You got to get out there. You want to be a good officer one day. When I was a cadet, you got to push yourself to get out there. The way you are is not right. What I understand today is I'm an introvert, and there's extroversion, and both are equally valid. And I did develop my extroverted capabilities, but I didn't change my personality. But if I got the message endlessly, you're too inside yourself, you're too much in your shell, right? That could lead to basically my neurotic loading, beating myself up. I'm not the way I'm supposed to be. I'm a failure. I will never be what I want. I fortunately didn't get that message. I got some of that messaging, but long story, not important. Point is, it didn't become part of a negative or my neurotic loading. It's okay to be an introvert and to develop skills to come out here and work with you guys a couple times a week. All the other things I do, which are very much out there in the world, interacting with other human beings. So personality can be shaped by the external world. When it is shaped by the external world, it's usually added to our neurotic loading. Okay? And we start to accept these measures that other people have for us that tell us we're deficient in some way. So healthy personality development would be to embrace your natural personality dimensions, aside from the dark traits. Okay, the dark traits, 4 dark traits. I'm talking about 5 traits internal, actually 4, but 5th is neurotic loading. That are perfectly okay to be in the world. It's perfectly okay to be an introvert and extrovert. There's 3 other dimensions of personality that are equally fine. They're just different. Okay. In the dark traits, we all want to score low on those dark traits, but about 20% of the population will score high on 1 or more. Okay. So 80% of us not going to show any signs of dark traits at all. If there's a dark trait present, I want you to get this: traits don't change. The way they're manifested can be changed, but they don't change. I will be an introvert to the day I die, okay? But I've been able to develop my ability to come out here and interact with you guys comfortably and enjoy it and look forward to it, right? You know? So I can develop my less preferred side. You're never going to change a trait. That'll feed into some of the stuff we're going to be talking about later, like the books out there that tell you what personality traits to develop. What's wrong with that idea right off the bat now that you've heard it? Here's a book. Here's the traits you should develop to become an effective leader. It's crap, but what's wrong with that?
It says that you don't have such personality to be.
Exactly, and so it says you'll never be a good leader, right? Because
you're missing this certain list of traits or something.
yeah, it's listing these, right?
It's highlighting your inadequacies.
Right, because you can't change your trait. You know, so if somebody says here are the personality traits to develop, you already know they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, characteristics. We have plasticity, right? But I'm never going to be an extrovert. Never. But that's okay because being an introvert is perfectly okay too. Introverts can be effective leaders, extroverts can be effective leaders, but being an extrovert or an introvert doesn't make you an effective leader either. Okay? So what you're going to find out later, and I'm going to show you why, is leadership isn't served by your temperament or your personality. How you approach it will be shaped by that, but not whether you can be effective. So, identity neurotic loading, this is the domain where we're starting to get shaped by our experiences out there in the world. And we get feedback from the world, and we get the feedback that says, you're a good son, you're a good daughter. Or, you're not such a good son, or you're not such a good daughter because you're not doing what we expect you to do. Well, that feeds into our own self-identity, right? And somebody else could say, what are you talking about? You're a great member of our community. I don't know why your family's so hard on you, right? Because you're creating a big fear out. So other people will give you reinforcement in another direction. That's shaping our identity. The stuff that gets in the way is our neurotic loading. It is part of identity. It's not really separate, but it's so important we separate it out because it's the I'm not good enough part of me, or I need to be other than I am. I'm not okay the way I am. The world doesn't embrace this part of me, right? So the workbook is going to give you this is both workbooks, more so in the second one, an opportunity to reflect on your identity and even what you might do with your neurotic loading, because we all got our neurotic loading. The next layer out is social power strategies. We actually are using all 12 forms of social power. It's just that you haven't learned what they are yet. Most people in the world haven't, because, well, you could Google 12 forms of social power and you won't find it. But you'll get it here, okay? And that is shaped by the external world as well, but it's also shaped by the internal world. So all of this is in the internal, but those outer layers, the further out you go, the more the social world can influence those, okay? That's what's going on. Now, we talked about the prefrontal cortex being wired with the limbic system. The two interface with each other, so we get those core drives. I'm really hungry, I need food, or I really want to get ahead quicker in my career, so I want to do a graduate degree. There's hunger in the moment, there's that long-term stuff that's all coming from the limbic system, sending data forward, and the prefrontal cortex saying, okay, how are we going to get a meal, our next meal? How are we going to get ahead quickly? Let's do a graduate degree, something like that, right? So how can I advance my career more quickly? I look at the options in my prefrontal cortex. Does that work? It's motivated by the limbic system. You know that the limbic system is sending that red color, that energy into the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex is going back to the limbic system and moderating it. I'm really, really hungry right now. And that's actually an alarm system. Hunger sets off an alarm system. And what's going on is the prefrontal cortex says, chill, relax, I need groceries this weekend. I got a lot of food in the fridge. Don't worry about it. Okay, yeah. And so you're motivated to get food, but you're not, you shut down the alarm system. You moderate it at that point, okay? How am I going to get ahead with, with my career? How am I going to get a competitive edge against all of the many people that are going after the jobs that I might be interested in? Hey, you know what? We've got an opportunity here. We could go to, we could go to Canada. We could do a master's degree, give ourselves a competitive advantage by doing that. So the immediate to the long term is all happening between the limbic system and the frontal cortex. That interface between the two. Okay? Does that make sense? So, frenemies in a way. Sometimes one can override the other one, right? We can panic and it shuts down our prefrontal cortex. Or we can be so clinical and so in our prefrontal area that we ignore our emotions, right? And they go, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I was uneasy, but and I should have listened to my gut. Well, listening to my gut usually means listening to my emotions, my limbic system, right? So hey, it looked good at the time. I'll take this job, but there's something about it. I ignored that because I went purely with my prefrontal. So we know too that of course today we have the most energetic resources available to us. The more energetic resources we have, the better we're able to focus our attention and shift our attention as we need to. Later in the day, we're depleted and it becomes more difficult to manage that attentional resource, right? So I can sit on the couch and watch Netflix at 10 o'clock at night, but I probably can't do some in-depth problem solving as effectively as I could earlier in the day. So I can focus on the TV program, but that's about it. So now we're going to bring in the rest of the model, and it is culture, and it is culture in a big way. Human beings are culture creatures. We're culture-making creatures, we're culture-transforming creatures, and we're culture-adapting creatures. You meet somebody new, and you start to interact with them, you are going to start to form a culture of two people, okay? And if you don't interact with the game, then that just falls by the wayside. But let's say they become friends. Well, you've got a culture of two people. And you think about it this way, we're going to get into this later in it, but let's say you have two best friends. I got a best friend from my military days, I got a best friend from my civilian world. I'm a different version of each of them, right? That's because I've got a culture with Dave that is different than my culture with Nick, right? And we interact differently on that basis. So we're culture creating creatures. We do it without even thinking, right? But it's the natural way that the brain works. So we're submitting culture. What are we talking about by culture? I mean, that's a big thing. Well, look at this. We're going to start at the top, our ethnic and our national cultures, okay? We are all coming from a particular ethnocultural background that is often associated with particular nation states, but not always, because there's some people that identify more with an ethnic group that crosses certain nation-state boundaries, right? But so we start with our ethnic and national level, then we get to our political and our socioeconomic. So I'm more liberal-leaning, or you're more conservative-leaning. I'm more into, Marxism, or let's say socialism, and you're more into, capitalism, for instance. So those are the level that we're talking about, the political differentials that we occupy. Socioeconomic is our class, our social class. So I told you last time, our first lecture was, I said I was born into a middle-class family, but in an upper middle-class neighborhood. Now, what's the difference? Well, the difference is we weren't poor at all, but everybody looked at us as though we were the poor family, because we didn't have the big boat or go on the big vacations away to different parts of the world. We were fine. I never worried about where we were going to have a meal or anything like that. But we grew up in an environment that was upper middle class, so we were looked upon differently. That shaped my sisters and my identity in the course of that. Okay, so social class is a big thing in relation to other people in the society that you're in, and it shapes our thinking rather dramatically. The class that you're born into. Okay, our religious and philosophical tradition. So I told you I was born into a Christian family, but we're not practicing. we would be cultural Christians because we celebrate Christmas, but we don't go to church. That would never happen in my family. So it's cultural, but it's not really religious based. And I told you my philosophical orientation is Taoism, right? So I really orient to the world through the lens that Taoism as a philosophy offers. You have your own versions of these, right? So you're swimming in all of that. And let's go over to the more micro level. We all came out of a family of origin, right? We have parents, whatever that family looks like. There's a family of origin there. And then if we go on and we have a partner and we produce children, then we have a conjugal family. And that conjugal family will have elements of my family and my partner's family, but it won't be identical to either of them. And there'll be unique things about my conjugal family that don't really share very much in common with either, my wife or my family of origin. So that whole dynamic around the family members. Now, the way I just described it is more of a Western nuclear family. If you come from a more collectivist culture where you don't have the two parents and the 2.5 children, and your partner comes and joins your family of origin, or you join their family of origin, still you're changing the culture by entering that particular culture. Now you're going to have a lot of that culture imposed on you, often lovingly, but maybe not. But you're going to be bringing some newness to that cultural mix. Okay. We get into generational and social groups. So generational will be the group that you're born into, the era that you're born into. My son, who's 20, has never known a time where there wasn't an iPhone. Now, he didn't always have an iPhone, but Daddy always had an iPhone. Now, I wasn't born into that, right? When I got my first iPhone, I was like, hey, cool. But I was an adult by that point, So he's got commonalities with the people that he has grown up around that will be different from mine and my parents, and I'm different from my parents' generational. So that's generational effects. Social groups, those are the people that you typically choose to hang out with, the people that you come close to in your studies here in Canada, right? It's one social group. You go to social groups at home, you're probably missing a lot, right? Because, gosh, I don't get a chance to hang out with my friends at home. So they're the most sort of chosen in most cases of the groups that we inhabit, but there'll be a culture to those particular social groups. If you're really into bicycling, you might join a group here in Windsor of, Windsor, bike riders or whatever, and they go on tours on weekends and things like that. That becomes a social group just by virtue of you're really into cycling, right? Or whatever it is that you might like. So that's social groups. And then you've got your team and your organizational cultures. So once you join a company, you're walking into a culture, and once they sign you to a team within that, you're going to have a team culture within the broader culture. And they're not always the same. They can be quite different. Absolutely, can be quite different. So we're culture-making creatures. My team counted up. I get this feedback at the beginning of every semester, and they told me I've taught 140 university courses at this point in my career. I've been the professor in every single one of them, obviously, but no two classes felt the same. No two classes felt the same. Okay? Because I can come in here and I can shape how I show up as your professor. The first day you were coming in, all you had was this announcement that I put out there, if you read it, and you're like, okay, what's this guy going to be like? Is he at any point going to point to me and say, what's the answer to that question? Right? In which case you're like, oh my God, this is what's this going to be like? I have to do reading before every class, and I have to know or not. I have profs like that. I'm never going to be that. But you were trying to figure that out. You're having to figure out what's the paradigm here, how is it going to be? And you guys are shaping culture. And so I have influence over it, but I have to. That's not the way it works. So every one of the courses I've ever taught has never felt identical, even though same subject matter very often. Okay. So we're culture making creatures all the time. let's look at what other brains are doing, because other brains constitute our social and environmental conditions, right? That's what's going on. So their brains are operating just like yours. There's more similarity between brains than there are differences between brains. The differences show up more readily. You can see somebody is more extroverted or more introverted or vice versa, right? It's very apparent. But at the end of the day, my brain works very similarly to the other 8 billion brains on the planet. Minus, to some degree, the 20% who have one or more dark personality traits. That makes a big difference in terms of how brains work. We'll get into that later, of course. So here is you interacting with the social world and all the various elements of the social world that you unfold in a day. Because you started out this morning and you've gone through, I don't know what you've gone through, but a series of interactions on your way to being here. And after this, you're going to go on and have a series of interactions after that, right? And what that is something that as you're meeting that environment that you're walking into next, your conscious awareness crystallizes. You're meeting the situation. So you've got an anticipation of what I'm going to meet. Let's say you're going to meet with your team for the first time, your assigned team, and you're expecting 3 other people to be there. And you walk in to the meeting and you know you're 5 minutes late, and you maybe texted ahead, you know, jump on the way, and you only see 2 people. Okay, well, I had the anticipation I was going to meet 3 people, but there's only 2. So your brain starts to crystallize. Well, you know, is one person just later than I am? Or did somebody drop the course? Or like, what's that mean? So your brain is adjusting to the immediate social and environmental conditions it's encountering against the prediction that you made about them, right? But their brains are doing the same thing, and they're going to give you feedback in the moment as well, because their brains are doing exactly the thing that yours are. So there's the 2 of them waiting, and you show up and they say, yeah, you know, our 4th member, they said they'd be, you know, 10 minutes late. And so you reconfigure on that basis, right? Or no, they actually, you know, dropped the course, and so it's 3 of us. And so that changes. In the course of your crystallizing awareness and the social feedback that you're getting from their crystallization of their awareness, you form something called an organization of self. Now, we have dozens of organizations of self. We're going to do a session after temperament on organizations of self, and in the workbook, you're going to have an opportunity to explore your organizations of self. Okay? This is a brand new concept. You can Google it. You will not find anything about organizations of self out there. It is the space between the inner world of the psyche and the outer world of other psyches. It is the version of you that comes forward in that place and time. And if you do this repeatedly, you will have a pretty common organization of self that you show up with that team. But we don't just have one organization of self for any particular group of people. We probably have multiple if we interact with them enough. Let's say you've got housemates. Okay, so there's 5 of you in the house. You have a division of who does what given what week, who does the dishes, who does the vacuuming, who does the whatever, okay? And you have a great relationship with all 5 of them. So you have a particular organization of self when things are going well. But then let's say 1 or 2 of the members of the house stop doing their share of the work. That creates another organization of self that's coming from you that's saying, hey, this isn't fair, this isn't right. And you're gonna have a very different way of showing up in relation to them at that time. They say, hey, I'm really, really sorry. I will do the dishes for the next 2 weeks. I know, and you go back into that comfortable organization of self as long as they live up to that. But if they don't, well. So we have multiple organizations of self, and it can be different organizations of self at the time of day. You walk in, they're playing music loud and having a great time, and ordinarily you would love that, but you didn't get good sleep last night. You weren't feeling really good, so they're inviting you to be social and interactive. And you're like, I need to go lie down, right? You know, that's another organization of self. It's just more of an internal state than the one that you might want to be in, because hey, I enjoy being around them, right? So organizations of self, we have many of them. Now, everything in this diagram is very intentional. So you'll notice that in the yellow, there's a little bit of white there. Okay, a little bit of white. That means that while there's culture entering us all of the time, we're swimming in culture, and it's impacting us and shaping our view of reality so frequently all the time, but it's still filtering in through our internal world, right? So that we don't necessarily experience the same event the same way. So here's an example. I told you, and my introductory announcement was very deliberate, right? To tell you what to expect. You want a professor who's going to read, teach you the textbook, just tell you what you need to get by in an exam, then I'm not going to be the professor you're going to like, okay? So if you still showed up wanting that, so somebody else said, no, I want to think for myself. I want to be invited into a space where I can critically evaluate information and learn stuff that's not in the textbook, you might be excited by that. So same prof, same lecture, and one person goes up and says, why do I have to learn all this crap? I just want to know what's on the exam. And somebody else who says, I want to learn stuff for life, okay? So I was trying to set those expectations for you. Somebody who doesn't like those expectations would likely seriously consider dropping the course, right? Moving into another one. Or, oh, it's the only one that fits in my schedule. I just have to tough it out. I have to put up with this jerk because why won't he just teach me what's in the textbook? Okay? So, two people, same experience, but their internal world, I just want to know what I have to know. I don't care about it. I just to get through the exams, that's all I'm concerned about. Versus the other person is like, no, I want to learn. Okay? So, very different experiences of the same particular event. That makes sense. So this is our roadmap, and how we're always swimming in culture. Our brains making sense of that, and we're also shaping culture by how we show up, right? So I'm going to adapt to the different cultural contexts that I'm in on the basis of my read of the situation. And I could get it wrong. I could be anticipating people or the way that they're going to show up differently than I imagine. And in that moment, I'm going to start to shift how I am amongst that. Okay. And it's not always to conform. I don't want you to think it's only about conforming. We'll talk about this when we get to organization stuff. It may be that I want to go in and I want to challenge, right? So when I very first started to teach, I had to figure out, is it my job just to teach the textbook? Or is it my job in university to go beyond the textbook? And I made a decision at that point, what the kind of prof I liked, where did I learn most, what prof do I want to be? And I was going into my first university course to teach it, and I've never gone back on that. But I do know people who get really pissed off with me because I don't teach the textbook, right? And so I've learned, hey, here's your announcement, here's what you're going to get. It's not going to be one where I just lecture at you and you regurgitate what I say on the in the text. So that's the way that I continue to show up. If I was told by business school or psychology where I teach, you must teach these things and only these things, I would quit being a prof. Absolutely, I would quit. Hands down, I would. And in fact, when I was teaching undergrad in business school, they were like, we want to standardize this particular course, so all profs have to do it. And it was like, okay, I'm never choosing to teach that course again. It's one course that's controlled, and I'm like, no, I'm not the one to teach it, so I don't anymore. So that's how that all works. Let's see. Yeah. Let's take 5 now. And then we're going to come back. I'm going to give you another piece of this. There's our own. Take 5 minutes.
Hi, Sonia. Did you say anything about the emotional?
No.
He hasn't said anything about it.
Producing some basic leaders. And we were teaching the most advanced theories of leadership in the world. Okay? Known. And most leadership theories in the 20th century were paid for by the military, often the American military, but you're trying to figure out. So there isn't military leadership and civilian leadership, it's just leadership. Okay? And I was at a point where I was accepted into 4 PhD programs, and I had to decide which way I was going on. 3 clinical psychology, and then applied social psychology, IO psychology here, okay? And I always thought I was gonna be a clinical psychologist, but in my time in the military, I was like, leadership is like so critical to every facet of human existence. I wanna understand this. And I went to my commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Don Beatty, who's an amazing leader, just an incredible leader. This man, he's retired. I left the military without retiring, right, to do what I'm doing with you guys now. And he could call me today and he could say, Ted, would you do this for me? And I'd say, right away, sir. I didn't have to call him sir anymore, and I wouldn't, okay? Because he's just an extraordinary human being who I would do anything for because I trust him that much. And you probably have somebody in your life. I hope you have somebody in your life. You've got that, right? Here's another point. Lieutenant Colonel Bob Beck could do that as easily and say, Ted, would you do this for me? And he's actually like, you know, he's older than Don Beatty, and you know, I'd still do anything for him. Okay? There are 2 people with completely different personalities. Bob is absolutely extroverted, right? And Don is absolutely introverted, and yet they are 2 extraordinary leaders. So I'm just foreshadowing on personality. Okay? Amazing. But I went to Lieutenant Colonel Beatty. It was a Wednesday afternoon, middle of the afternoon, just a kind of rare, quiet moment. I said, sir, I could get his attention anytime. I was his second in command. There was no problem. But I said, sir, could I ask you a personal question? He said, sure, Ted, what is it? And I said, sir, I know all the leadership theories that we're training in here. And, as we all learned them, and now we're training in them. Could you tell me, because I would do anything you ask me. I would trust you that much. And could you tell me how you use the situational leadership model on me to get me to want to do anything that you ask me to do? And he paused. He said, I guess I don't think I really use the situational leadership model. I said, okay, sir, well, how about 99 managerial grit? We're training that one, Blake and Mouton's 99 managerial grit. Can you tell me how you use that on me? And he said, oh, I definitely don't use that on you, Ted. And I said, well, how about Vrooman Yetton's leader decision-making theory? Like we teach on that one. And he goes, Ted, I think we need to go to the officer's mess and have a beer. Okay? Now, we never did this. We went after hours, but we could. We have all the power to do this. But this is the one time ever. So on Wednesday afternoon, we go to the officer's mess and have a big beer, but I had a vodka and something, and he had a beer. And we started to talk. And we came up with this realization because, you see, deep down inside, I was like, I don't know. I don't use these theories. I don't apply these theories. And yet somehow we're producing some amazing leaders. And I've got some amazing people who work for me who say they do anything that I ask them to do. So what's going on, right? We're teaching them. I'm not using them. Must be something wrong with me. So I'm going to go to Lieutenant Colonel Don Beatty, who's so much smarter than me, and he'll tell me. And he said in that conversation that went for 2 hours, I'm not using any of these theories. Okay? And that's the desperate truth of the matter, is that those were the 20th century leadership theories. I'm going to show you now, right? Why it is that leadership is, because that led me to go away from the 3 clinical programs I was accepted in, take this PhD program to try and answer those very questions. And I got here, and I'm exposed to the big, massive handbook of social psychology. And it says in every single edition up to the present of the Handbook of Social Psychology, leadership is the most studied and least understood phenomena in social psychology today. But they keep saying that every time they come out with a new edition to the handbook. And the handbook is like huge. And it is intensely studied. And we don't understand it until we do it. Okay, so I got an answer for you now, but I want you to understand that if you have been trained by Western theorists in leadership, I want you to forget all of that stuff. I don't know what came out of the culture that you might be in, and it may be some beautiful wisdom there. But since you're in a Western business school, I'm going to tell you right now, don't believe any of the stuff that's in the textbooks, and I'll show you why. Okay? So I came here to find out the answers, and I thought it was already found out, and it wasn't, because that's what it said. So we've been working on this problem ever since to actually give a framework for understanding what leadership is and how to do it in a way that we've never been able to do before. So I set out to try and do that. And lo and behold, we got some answers, right? So what went wrong? Why is the nature of leadership so elusive? Should we have some clarity by now? Well, thankfully, recently we do. Still not in the textbooks. Here's why, okay? So there's 120 years in the quest for a general theory of leadership. So social psychology goes back to about the 1880s. We weren't studying leadership then. Leadership wasn't on the table. It was assumed that we have the answer to leadership at the beginning of the 20th century. And this is what it was. In the 1900s, leadership is determined by social class. Some are born to rule, some are born to follow. So, right, if you're in the upper class, you're a natural leader. If you're in the lower class, you're a natural follower. You can't actually lead. Okay? That was the assumption of Europe, right, where my ancestors come from. And it was just an extension of Europe by then, right? We're a nation, but pretty small. Still are. So 1900s leadership is determined by social class. Here's where the problem came. World War I, which started in 1914, ended in 1918, didn't go well at all. The generals were all of the upper class. The lower working class were the guys who fought in the trenches and whatnot, and it didn't go any. They all thought, hey, we'll go off and march into war gloriously and come home by Christmas. Well, 5 years later, they're eventually coming home, right? Devastation, absolute devastation. That war did not, no war goes well. That went terrible, right? So that called into question social class. But here's psychology that's been around for a while, and we're starting to study personality traits and intelligence. And so, okay, we got a science, a fledgling science coming along. So leadership is a set of definable personality traits combined with intelligence, right? And so they start to study. They take people that they consider good leaders, and they measure them on intelligence and personality traits. And they take people that they consider bad leaders, and they measure them on personality and intelligence. And then what I could do, if that works, is take all of you, give you personality tests, give you intelligence tests, and then go, okay, this group here, you guys are going to be the leaders, you guys will be the followers. Make sense? Okay. You can still see books out there that get it, kind of get it. Well, here's the problem, okay? Think about science. 500 plus studies were done, no two replicated. We get this set of traits in one study, and they wouldn't even replicate in another. And then as we compared all the studies, we get no consistent pattern. In science, if you can't replicate, you got nothing. Nothing, zero, zilch, nothing that you can rely on. So 500 plus studies on the ideal personality traits reveal that it ain't personality traits. As intuitive as you might think it should be, and there's where I said, if I were to get Colonel Don Beatty and Lieutenant Colonel Bob Beck in the room at the same time, you would see them as very different personalities. Okay? Both excellent leaders. Outstanding leaders. Okay? So, all right. So where do we go after the 1920s? 1940s, leadership is a set of definable behaviors directed towards followers. Now, 1940s, we're moving into World War II. And wars tend to expedite, like the pandemic expedited a lot of things that were already in the works. Well, the thinking at the time was there must be a certain set of behaviors that effective leaders do to their followers to get those followers to do something. And this was culminated by General Eisenhower's definition of leadership, which is still incredibly popular today. Eisenhower went on to be president of the United States later on, so I mean, who could argue with it? He said, write this one down, leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. Okay? He, intentional for the day, It was sexist at the time. So leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. And people are like, whoa! And if I brought that into a leadership training program today in a way like this is the answer, many would go, whoa! But others would look at that and go, that's freaking manipulation. I don't want to be manipulated, thank you very much. I'll make up my own mind if I want to do it or not. Okay? Now it sounds good as long as you're not the one being controlled, in a sense, right? But the minute you realize that that's what leaders are being trained to do, find the right magic words to make you do what I want you to do in a way that you think you want to do it, that feels like manipulation. Okay? That's still really popular in most leadership training out there. Okay? And so it implies that what I do, if it's the right thing, will guarantee make you want to do what I want you to do. Okay? That sounds appealing in some regards. Here's the problem. Consideration versus task focus. That's where they went. Some leaders are more considerate to their followers. Some leaders are more task focused. Some are a combination. As it turned out, none of it generalized. So the behavior that I engage in that was effective with my team, somebody else copies in their team, and it fails miserably. Okay? Again, no generalization. If you don't have generalization in science, you got nothing. So this didn't generalize. Put a lot of time and attention into this one. Didn't bear fruit at the end of the day. So what works in one cultural context won't work in another cultural context. That means that leadership isn't universal. And a foreshadowing the role of culture that's going to enter shortly. Okay? But something that is highly effective in one cultural context, even in one team cultural context, emulated in another one, doesn't work. People look at that and interpret it completely differently and reject it as something that's going to be effective. Okay? So, 1940s, give way to the 1950s, leadership is a definable set of styles that produce different outcomes. So, we have a person who's got the right leadership style for one setting, but shouldn't be a leader in another setting where there's different conditions, right? So in a highly predictable environment, we want one style of leader. In a highly volatile, let's say an emergency room situation, you want a very different style of leader, okay? And this made a lot of sense to people and led to a lot of interesting theories that came out of it. Here's the problem with the 1950s: contingency theories, meaning in this situation I'm this way, in this situation you're this way, kind of thing, right? Emphasize leadership situation fit. It only worked in the lab, and even then, not very well. So while it seemed to make sense to theorists, it didn't pan out in reality. Again, science comes up with, we know what it is. It's not a set of personality traits, not a set of unique kinds of behaviors that I engage in. It's not a way of being against the set of circumstances I'm in, okay? So we've got to reject all of those. Problem is, you'll still find books that suggest all of this, by the way, popular books today. Okay, so there's that fadism, right? And it won't be coming from the social scientists. There's a reason that social scientists aren't producing those books anymore. May not be why you think. Leadership doesn't matter in the 1970s. Autonomous work matters. Create leaderless groups. This came out of this promise of the company Volvo. You heard of Volvo? Their cars in their parking lot today is Volvo, okay? The Scandinavian company. And what would happen is you've got highly skilled tradespeople building an entire car at a time. And they all knew their roles and they all worked effectively together. And that sounded like, okay, we don't need leaders at all. Throw out leadership. We don't need it. And just trade people to do the task and they'll do great. Here's the problem. Leaderless groups only worked in highly predictable environments. The minute something happened that wasn't predicted, the group fell apart. Didn't know how to function. So that failed too, okay? It can work when the environment is very predictable. Oh, by the way, we're in a VUCA world now, which is volatile, unpredictable. Right? So it didn't work even in more predictable environments because something will go wrong, right? Something will happen to a team. Of course, so it doesn't generalize. 1980s leadership is a set of abstract principles to apply in every novel situation. So here's the 7 principles that Stephen Covey says to practice to be an effective leader. One of them is, here's one of the principles, sharpen the saw. That's one of the principles, okay? Sharpen the saw. And then he describes what that means. Fair enough, okay? Well, they all sound good, and I could make a lot of money if I gave you the principles. In fact, we could come up with a list of principles that would sound very compelling to you. I went and I paid 150 USD to watch an American hero, not one of mine necessarily, but an American hero, Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf, who led the coalition forces in a war that should never have been fought, the first Gulf War, okay? And he was the big hero leader to the Americans. And I went, I thought, okay, I want to see what this guy says, because it's all about leadership. He's going to reveal this big secret of leadership that I paid the 150 USD, and you're about to get those secret principles. Okay, right here. I'm going to, so you listen carefully, because you came with your tuition. Okay. So it's like an hour and a half, and they've got like confetti going off as he comes out, and you know, fireworks inside the Pontiac Silverdome, and everybody is cheering and everything. But we're all there to find out. Of course, you know, I'm already going with some degree of skepticism, right? You know, but I'm gonna go listen. Okay. So he does his happy talks and his inspirational talks for a while, and then he's going to get down to his principles of effective leadership. I'm going to share them with you right now. You don't have to pay anything extra for them, okay? So he comes out, and when it's finally time, the crowd goes hush. And everybody's just waiting for hanging on his every word. And he's going to say, here's how I led the coalition forces. Okay? Here's what you need to do, just what I did. Okay, you ready now? Okay, here it comes. Do the right thing. Whoa! Right? Do the right thing. Okay, now he qualified it after. Oh, okay, well, that'll help, right? He said, it's not quite enough to do the right thing. He said, okay, ready? Know and do the right thing. Oh, well, now I got it. See? That's what we got for 150 bucks USD. Okay? Know and do the right thing. Can you disagree with that? No. If you hear the principles that they put out there, you'll never disagree with them. You know? Parents, love your children. Okay, I've got it now. Okay. You can't argue with that. But that's the depth of these books on the principles. It doesn't work, because how do I know the right thing? Right? And then how do I know to do what I have to do on the basis of that knowledge? Because every situation is so complex. And what might work for you won't work for you and won't work for you. Right? Okay? So, here was the problem with this whole thing, right? It's impossible to anyone to do the inherent complexity of real life. Okay? And I told you leadership's one of the hardest things you're ever going to do. Fortunately, we have psychology to make it less hard, but there's no way that we're going to make it easy. Okay? But I want to equip you guys for leading it. So, that was the 1980s. 1990s, leadership is fad, guru, icon, emulation. Flavor of the month. Flavor of the month is this idiom, this expression in North America in particular that relates to Baskin Robbins. Anybody in Baskin Robbins ice cream? They got one here in Windsor, okay? They've got like 30 some odd flavors, I forget, or 40 or something. And then they'll have their flavor of the month, right? So they don't have all of the flavors all the time. They've got their core flavors, and then they'll bring in their flavor of the month. That's what that's related to, because if you don't get it this month, another flavor is going to come along, right? So at the very first time I met you guys, I was talking about fadism. Well, that's where we were in the 1990s, okay? Where it's, hey, I ran a successful company, I made a lot of money, I'm retired now, I'm going to write my leadership book, and you're all going to scramble to read it, okay? And, you know, because you want the leadership magic done. Know and do the right thing. Okay? That's what we're all looking for. Well, the problem is fadism, flavor of the month. has been the norm for the last 30 plus years. Psychology. So I go here to study and find out what's the leadership secret sauce, and I find out nobody has it. Oh, by the way, you want to do research on leadership? You won't get any funding for that. Nobody's doing anything on leadership. So the social sciences don't have better answers for you because they stopped, they gave up effectively, and they just regurgitate the same stuff out of the last century in most textbooks today. Okay? So you'll still see the same stuff I was teaching and my troops were teaching to our officer candidates that long ago. Okay? Good news is we're not there anymore. Okay? But in the course of my doing my research, I was like, why doesn't anything generalize? And the answer to me seemed to be like, what works in one culture will maybe work in another, and so I was onto something. So I dove into, after exploring the leadership literature, the literature on culture. As the culture theorists don't talk to the leadership theorists, at least back then, and the leadership theorists don't talk to the culture theorists. So this is the kind of the problem that we're encountering. So let's look at what the culture theorists were thinking. In the 1960s, no one's talking about culture. Before that, the social sciences here in the West. What's culture? That's what foreigners have, right? We don't have culture, see? Because it was all a bunch of middle-class white men in the 1960s who were the social scientists. And as far as they were concerned, it was anybody who wasn't from us has culture, but we're the norm. And everybody else is, right? Now, let's face it, right? When you guys came to Windsor for the first time, you were like, these Canadians are weird. Like, what kind of culture did I just walk into? Like, for heaven's sakes, people, like, you do that? What? Right? Okay. We were so culture blind that we didn't know we had culture. Okay? That's how arrogant the social scientists of that day were. Culture blind and incredibly sexist. Incredibly sexist for the time. Okay? So, what's culture? That's what foreigners have. Well, culture is a concept that only anthropologists used for the other, whoever the other was. Well, they never considered that me as a white male in this culture, I'm the other to, most of you in this class, right? According to that. So we don't even go as far back with culture as we do leadership. Then in the 1970s, we have this thing called the quality revolution. The Japanese were beating the North Americans. So rush over to Japan and find out what they're doing to make better cars. So you bought a car coming right from Windsor. Windsor's the the automotive hub of Canada, Detroit, the United States. You'd buy a car, and within 2 years, maybe even just 18 months, it would rust out. They were so badly made that you couldn't count on keeping a car for any length of time. But if you bought a Japanese car, it could last 10 years. Okay? So what was going on? Well, the big three then, Ford, Chrysler, GM, said, we got to go find out what the Japanese are doing. And so they go over there and they start to take notes and follow the Japanese around, figure out what the Japanese are at. And they say, okay, at the beginning of the day, they have their entire workforce, 2,000 people out in front of the plant, and they all do calisthenics. Yay, everybody does calisthenics. And the North Americans are going, okay, write that down. Everybody, at the beginning of the day, start with calisthenics. That would be a good thing to do, right? And then we come back here and say, okay, everybody over there at the Chrysler plant, get out there in front, we're going to do calisthenics. And everybody goes, yeah, no freaking way. We're not jumping up and down for you in any way, shape, or form. Take a flight, okay? So, emulating a culture is always a fail. You'll see it coming up here, okay? Because it just doesn't work. Because interesting enough, see, the Japanese workers had no problem doing calisthenics before they started a shift because, well, they started that in elementary school, right? That was the norm at that time in Japan, so no big deal. But you come here and say, okay, everyone's going to do this, and everyone's like, no, I don't think so, right? So the Japanese practices were rejected by North American management employees. We're not doing it, okay? And it's not how what was going on anymore. So 1980s culture is the secret recipe to success. You copy the Fortune 500 companies. Still tons of thinking around this, okay? Copy the successful ones, do what they do. Well, here's the problem, I'll just jump to it, right? There's no data to support that recipe ingredient, and there's no means to emulate. If I could take my practice and then go study, one of the Fortune 500 companies, and then find out what they do as a set of habits and norms and bring it back to my team. By the time I got those into effect, if I could, and I couldn't, by the way, it won't work because people just reject that crap. By the time I emulated one of the big Fortune 500s, they would have moved on and they're doing something else different. Okay? So emulating a culture always fails because you can't. Culture is made by the people. My 140 classes, I never had 2 classes that felt the same, right? Because they were always different students. Even when I had students from different classes, the times were still a different mix, and it was different yet again. So you can't copy culture, nor should you. It won't work. Okay? So in 1990s, we get into learning cultures. Turn your company to a company of continuous learning. That one has a little bit of merit because you need a company that can adapt by learning. Okay, that didn't work well with that client. I guess we better try something different the next time, right? So there's an element of that. There's a little bit of science behind that. But being a learning company isn't everything. It's one good feature of things. You guys are all learning individuals, otherwise you wouldn't be here. There are some people that they stop learning in high school and they will never learn another thing as far as they're concerned throughout their lives, right? It's almost a deliberate choice. I've known a few of those individuals. So this ultimately, there's a good thing about being a continuous learning company, but it's this much of culture. And if you don't have it, that's probably a bad thing, okay? Next, cultures of employee engagement versus disengagement. Now, in this course, we're talking about managing for high performance. It's also managing, right, for high engagement, high performance. There is something to engagement. This concept isn't a bad thing. But how do you create high engagement? There is no recipe. There's no uniformity for that, right? So what they did was they looked at Silicon Valley in the 2000s as the startups. And what were they doing? Well, they were attracting people by having foosball, games and throw pillows and free food in the fridge and daycares and all the rest of it. So an automotive company started to try to emulate this, and it was like nobody used the throw pillows. They thought it was stupid, or they didn't want to work anymore because they want to play foosball, right? So again, it's this culture emulation thing, and it failed as well. So 210s, affirmation of primacy of culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. This is true. This culture is the single largest determinant of how things get done. Write that one down. That is, and you guys are in HR, you're going to be questing after the right policies, the right procedures down in the workplace. Those are important. But I could have the best policy manual in the world, but culture will determine whether we actually follow those policies or not. Okay, we might, if the culture is, hey, we're very policy driven, we might not even know where the policy manual exists. Oh, it's there. If the Ministry of Labor comes in and says, we want to see your policies and procedures and your safety manual, oh, it's right here. Do you follow it? Culture determines that. Culture determines the single largest determinant of how an organization functions, how work gets done. But there's no definitive finding as to what constitutes a universal culture of success. So what we're going to be doing together in this is looking at what gets in the way of functional culture and working to remove that. We're going to look at what gets in the way of your ability to lead people effectively, and then invite you to try to overcome that, right? That's where the workbooks come in, to develop that self-insight, to consider how do I want to show up and exercise social power in relation to other human beings? Because those other human beings are going to have some feelings about how you exercising power. And while I'm happy to give social power of various forms to Lieutenant Colonel Don Beatty or Lieutenant Colonel Bob Beck, two very different human beings, there are other colonels that I served under who, if they called me today and said, Ed, would you do this? I'd say, I'm sorry, you got the wrong number, and hang up, right? Because they were not people that I wanted to follow, I did what I was told, but that was about it, right? Because they were not individuals who would garner any long-lasting kind of loyalty, devotion, or engagement in the task, right? And that's what these individuals were capable of doing. So we're gonna carry on next time with this. I'm gonna shift it to the workbook, okay? So then we do some coaching on how to take on the workbook. So just go out of this for a second. And walk through this. Now, as I said in the announcement, this is of course the workbook. I did you a PDF version and a Word docx version. And I'm not going to give you an example of any of the answers to this because every workbook is going to be absolutely, if you do it well, it's going to just reflect who the heck you are. And I will know if you're putting the energy in or not. So there is no right or wrong answer. The wrong answer would be a couple words on this, no real reflection on that, not coming up with any development plans for myself, right? That's going to get you a low mark. But you pour yourself into that, you take on those tasks in there, and you come up with stuff, I'm going to know you're doing the work, okay? And that's where you are going to be doing exactly what is on the front of that workbook, which is this. The most important thing you can do to develop yourself as a leader is develop yourself as a human being, okay? That's not a statement of some lofty philosophical ideal. That's a statement based on solid psychological evidence. Those who are not self-aware, low on social intelligence, low on emotional intelligence, and those who would be high on dark traits. Well, let's just go with EQ and SQ for first, okay? Those low on EQ and SQ, low ability to reflect upon themselves and understand themselves and what's driving them, will really struggle to ever be effective leaders. But everybody can increase your social and emotional intelligence. So these workbooks are an invitation for you to do exactly that, okay? Dark traits aside, we'll come back to that. Those are the individuals who will always abuse power. They'll want more and they'll abuse it. 20% of the population of that book score higher, one or more of the dark traits, usually more, and they're just individuals. But this is the book. And there's some coaching notes going into this. So everything that you write in your book will be seen only by you, okay? Nobody else will actually have access to it. Between you and me, what you choose to share with me. So that's the overarching task. What you're not going to do is send me everything that you do in terms of these exercises. There's come back to the premises and explore those a great deal. There's your model. I changed it up from orange to yellow. It's the same model, there's no changes. And here is the first task. Okay, so, but this one relates. This first, the Talehi-Vogt self-check wellness survey and the occupational fatigue exhaustion recovery scan are the first two tasks, and you can start them. I hope you've already started them. Those get at the core self needs, right? The whole foundation of the four practices is based on your ability, your wellness, your ability to show up for the people that you're leading, for the people in your team who you're responsible to. So these scales come with a bunch of coaching notes. And so this is, once I do the wellness self-check, and you can do it as many times as you want. I still do it. We developed it as the pandemic broke for our clients, and I've been doing it myself all along because it's self-scoring, right? That data is just in this Excel sheet, and it self-scores for you, and then it compares every time you do it to your last time. I'm going to encourage you to do it once a week. Not 12 times, because there's not 12 weeks between now and when the book is there, but look for the patterns, right? So when I started doing it, I was doing pretty well on most of the dimensions, but what came up as a problem for me was sleep hygiene. I was not attending to my sleep. I can very much easily get into, I'll sleep tomorrow, right? I'll catch up tomorrow, but then I don't catch up tomorrow. Oh, okay, I'll wait and I'll get caught up in the weekend, and then I don't get caught up in the weekend. So I was starting to erode my ability to even lead my team because I wasn't attending to that. And so once I recognized the pattern, oh yeah, I'm not, right? So it's a way of taking stuff that is there, but not necessarily self-evident, right? So this has coaching notes in it to show you how to approach change, how to approach it, do it in micro stages. I won't get into it. It's a great thing. But what you're going to do is do the wellness self-check, do the offer 15, and offer 15 is a precursor to burnout. So I hope you're not burned out, but this is something you can do many times in your future to understand what burnout is and how to recover from it. So there's the offer 15. You fill that out. Now, I don't need your raw scores. I don't need to see this filled out. It's not that important. What I want to see when you submit your Word doc version is your answers to this stuff right here. Okay, your reflection and action planning exercise. And hey, if you're doing really well in terms of self-care, what's your plan to continue doing that as you move through the very final stages of your degree? And then the very stressful thing of finding work going forward. What are you going to do to maintain those positive things? And if you find, like I did, that you're not strong on one of those dimensions, what are you going to do to try to turn that around, like I did with sleep hygiene? Right? That was really important. So, and the space on these pages, it's not indicative of how much time you should be spending on it. Everybody's going to be different. Some of the questions you'll have a few words or a few sentences to. Others you're going to write paragraphs on, right? This one resonated. This is important to me. Here's what I've got. Okay. Tolerance for ambiguity, self-assessment scale. I don't need to see the scale. What I want to know is, how do you relate to this, given that we're in a VUCA environment, and this is all about tolerance for uncertainty, and uncertainty is the you in VUCA. That's it. We're facing a lot of it. What's that going to mean for you going forward as a team member, right? So that's there's your questions that I want you to respond. And you don't have to be constrained by the questions. If something else is what I want to talk about with respect to this, go with it. As long as you're reflecting on you and what am I going to do now that I'm aware of this. Does that make sense? So, yeah. Can't do temperament yet. We'll be doing temperament next week, and organizations themselves. We'll be doing it shortly, okay, and that will give way to other exercises. But in the meantime, we got lots to do with respect to the offer 15 and the self-check. Okay, so see you all on Wednesday.